Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Dianne Hartshorn.
We are super excited. We said this last week and we're saying it again, but we have Tui Snider on with us tonight. So super happy to have her back. So welcome back, Tui.
Thank you so much. I've been really looking forward to this. I'm so excited.
I can't wait to hear all about this trip. I mean, I followed you when you were taking your trip and I was following along, but we're going to talk about her trip to Italy and the tours that she was giving and the cemeteries there in just a moment. But we do want to remind our listeners and our viewers on YouTube that our official merchandise is up and running. It's an Etsy shop if you want the t-shirts or the mugs or any of that stuff. And then we also have the tea, which is the other shop. All those links are in the show notes. They're also directly on the website now. I've got all that up and running through our website. So you can just, on our website, there's an actual like shop button that you can click on. It'll take you to all this stuff and you can order whatever you want. And I want to say thank you to, I forgot to write her name down, but we did have somebody who just ordered a t-shirt and I believe it was a sticker. So thank you for that order. We appreciate it. And so we're excited to see people wearing their t-shirts or using their coffee mugs, or, you know, if you have the sticker, you can put that on your water bottles or your laptops or whatever. So make sure if you do purchase something and you get it, tag us on social media. Let us see how you're using it because we'd love to see all of that going around. So I think that's the only reminder I have tonight. I don't think there's anything else.
That's it.
I know there will be some other stuff coming up soon with Christmas and everything coming up, but we're not quite there yet. So we're going to be able to jump right into Tui's visit to Italy. I mean, this was such a fabulous trip, and you wrote all about it on your blog, and you have lots of pictures
lots more
too. Yes. So if you look behind, if you're watching with us on YouTube right now, and you look behind Dianne, she's got one of the fabulous sculptures and that's just one of like a million that Italy has.
Yes.
Of sculptures. So tell us, first, let's kind of start with how this all came to be, how you ended up giving tours of cemeteries in Italy.
Yeah. And first, also, I have to say, you know, I bet we're all relieved that we've survived spooky season because some people, it seems like that's the only time they think of cemeteries. I'm always like, huh, what? You know, and also here in Texas, I don't know how it is for Colorado, but it is a time when it's finally the weather's nice enough that everyone can get outside. And we had so many cemetery events. And I had two in one day, in fact, two different cemetery festivals. It was crazy. They're also here in Texas. We had some wonderful Dia de los Muertos events. There was Oakland Cemetery in Dallas. I got to give Monica Newberry a shout out. She's doing an amazing job over there. But it is really nice to see these historic cemeteries that are really being part of the community and the community events. And I mean, it wore me out, but I had a blast. And I know for you guys, I'm behind now on I have to catch up on your podcast. I really love the Mary Shelley one. That was really great, but I'm behind. So anyway.
Don't even feel bad. We totally understand. October is crazy, but you know what? Like you mentioned, I love the fact that more cemeteries are doing more community involvement and more activities to get the community on board and more cultural events, like all that Dia de los Muertos stuff, which makes a lot of sense in Texas. Even in like New Mexico, Arizona, all of those, you know, southern states like that, or southwestern states too. It's nice to see it being bigger and making other people more aware that this stuff is going on. So and I enjoyed, you had a lot of fun little videos and stuff that you took when you were at your events. So that was fun
it was amazing. It was really
to see all those performers and stuff doing the things that they did. It was great to do it vicariously through your videos.
Yeah, the caliber of the performances in this cemetery. I thought it was going to be some people who were like, okay, let's just get together and do a little something. No, I was like, whoa, this is amazing. These people are
an event.
Very, yes.
It was huge.
High caliber. But listen,
I'm glad you were able to make it to it. Glad you survived them all.
Yes, I did. Woo, I'm here.
Now we're going to head into, you know, the holidays and everything else, the rest of the holidays. But I bet, now you mentioned it, Texas is probably a little hot in the summer to do.
This is the first day I've not had a fan blowing on me at some point in the day since May. So it's been like 6 months of at some point I'm just hot and humid. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is exciting day. I need to mark this on my calendar. This is
We'll have
the
to have you
first
come
day.
visit us. We've got all kinds of snow. I mean, we got, I don't know how much you got at your house,
About
but
2
we got
feet.
20 inches at our house
Oh,
last week.
whoa.
So
Whoa, the rain? Or was it snow?
snow,
Oh,
Snow.
holy
snow.
moly. We had a
I
lot of
tell you,
rain.
it started snowing on Wednesday and it didn't really stop until Saturday.
Oh my
So
goodness. Well, our
we're,
good cemetery friend Ken and Patty Reed, they're the ones that gave me this pin. I
yes.
can't look at there. It's like looking at it says I'm a morning person. What's a
I have
oh,
Ah,
two
that's
buttons.
good.
did you get that too? I wear it
Yes, they
to
gave me
all
one too.
my cemetery talks because I just love puns. I think that's so cute.
I
Anyway,
love it.
he sent a picture of a moose in his yard and a squirrel. So it was kind of like Rocky and Bullwinkle. Anyway,
Oh,
very cute. I love he knows that I'm fascinated by the fact that y'all get moose. And
yeah.
so he does send me, I might get an armadillo or a roadrunner, but I'm not likely to see a moose down
Yeah,
there.
but we don't have armadillos or
They're
roadrunners, so
they're
yeah,
pretty cool. They're pretty
yeah,
cool.
pretty cool.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
All right, I really will answer your question one of these
No, you're fine.
days.
It was totally fine to do the shout out. So yeah, really, because you're an American, you live in Texas. So how did you end up hosting tours in Italy of all places?
Yes. Okay. So it all really came about because of my newsletter. I've had a newsletter for wow, since yeah, it's been 10 years since
Oh,
2014.
I was gonna
I
say you've
was
been doing a long time.
and I was really scared to do it at first. I didn't know, and it's taken me a long time to really get my footing. But it's grown little by little, and I've made some friends around the world. I have a lot of people in Texas on the newsletter, but I do have some people, like I had mentioned before, that gal Gisela from who lives in Portugal, who
Hmm.
when we were in Portugal, I got to see her. And so it was kind of like that. This woman named Lisa Statkis, who's funny thing is, because I grew up in Virginia and then Washington State. And she's from, I think, Washington State originally, but she's an artist and for a living, she organizes these tours for other artists in
Oh, fun.
Italy. And they do different things. Like I think next year she has a woman who's going to do exercises, like physical exercise, but a lot of them, another gal is doing sketching and painting.
Oh,
And
how
so
fun.
a lot of the people who do her tours and they're overland tours. So, and what she does is she, gets these small groups of up to 12 people, and then she has vans with private driver, and she does that. Well, at some point, she signed up for my newsletter, and maybe 5 years ago, she even floated the idea. Would you ever think about leading a tour, being a tour guide, blah, blah, blah. I said, sure. I think at the time, though, my father-in-law was living with me and, he had dementia. It was really hard to go anywhere. And I was like, I mean,
Right.
it's a nice thing to daydream about. We kind of back and forth it a little bit. But last year, it just all came together. And she said, hey, I'm serious. I want to have you come over as a cemetery symbols guide
Oh, I love
for a
it.
10-day tour. And it's open to people who, you don't have to be an artist. You can just take photos. It's for anybody who's interested in the amazing cemeteries that they have in Italy, the historic ones. And I was like, sure, sign me up. And that's how it came about. And it was just really so amazing. It was so much more. We did see some amazing cemeteries, obviously, but we also saw an ossuary. Like I'd never been to a bone chapel before. We stayed in a little agriturismo, which is kind of like their, Airbnb-ish or whatever you
Hmm.
call it, B&B thing, not Airbnb, but in the Tuscan countryside.
Oh,
And
oh
she
my
had a
gosh.
right. I was very spoiled. We had a private chef who was cooking for us, a Eufemia.
and you get all
Um,
that fresh Italian food. Oh.
yes, yes, elastic waistbands are a must.
Oh, I
Wonderful
bet.
Italian food.
Um,
Yeah, it was great. And then we did, we were doing all sorts of cemetery stuff, but there was like a really nice pool. It was the house, it was a farmhouse from the 1400s. And the room my husband and I stayed she said I could bring my husband. I was like, great. Had little niches in the wall where she had teapots and things,
Oh,
but
how cute.
that's where the chickens would roost. Isn't that hilarious? I just thought that was so great.
Oh, so they bring the chickens in. Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah,
so
because they lived inside, and then the people lived above. I mean, this is an old place. Yeah, but it had, like I said, a very nice swimming pool, which I love because I love to swim. And the beautiful Tuscan countryside. We went to some villages too. We went to Orvieto, which has this amazing cathedral with but it's a little winding streets. We went to Cortona, which is where Under a Tuscan Sun, the Francis May lives. Yep. And then right nearby is where there's a scene in Gladiator where he's walking, I think, to the Elysian Fields or whatever. I think that's it, but it's a very famous scene from Gladiator. And you can see the scene. You're like, oh yeah, I could see how they shot it from here. We saw Etruscan museums, all sorts of things. So and then of course just the fun of hanging out with really nice people who are interested in cemeteries as well. It was a real great times. That's how it all came about. I was amazingly, I don't know how Pinch Me she found me, and actually she invited me, and my husband's like, he kept asking me, what's going on? This person wants you to come over. And I'm like, yeah. I kept showing her her website, and I'm like, she's a real person. And I mean,
he was a little worried there. I could tell.
He was a little worried. But it all ended up being amazing.
Oh, I bet. Well, and to think, I mean, those cemeteries, a lot of them are fairly old, and the fact that it's in Italy where art is a huge part of the culture. So you get a lot of different sculpting and a lot of other types of art that you're not going to see in American cemeteries or even in other countries quite the same way, because
unless they commissioned it and had it
sent over,
which you do see a lot. I did just look, and that cemetery I was at recently, they have a beautiful sculpture of a little girl, and I looked on the side, and it's in a very Italian sounding name on the side. I'm like, oh, I wrote it down. I can't remember it now, but I'm like, I'm looking him up later. I didn't recognize it immediately, but I'm like, oh, I've got to look him up.
Isn't your angel at Evergreen from Italy originally?
Yeah,
wasn't that one carved in Italy?
If I say that right, Carrara, Italy.
Yeah. Oh, the marble. Yeah, the marble, the Carrara marble.
That's what I thought. So, but it's just, and the Italians, just their art is everywhere when you're in Italy. It's in the cemeteries, obviously, but it's on the buildings, and it's in the squares, and it's everywhere you go. There's art.
Saturation of art.
Yes. For sure. When you're there and you're trying to see it all, it's hard to take it all in because there's so, like, your head feels like it's on a constant swivel.
I'm still trying to digest this trip. There's still so much to it. There was a lot I learned, and I was taking notes like mad all the time, and I did so much research beforehand. But then when I was there, it's one thing to do your research, another thing to see it, and you're like, oh, this is what they were talking about, or oh, what is this all about now? This doesn't make sense, so there was a lot of that going on.
I love it. Yeah. So you said you visited 4 different cemeteries while you were there, monumental cemeteries, I should say. So tell us a little bit about those 4, where they were located, and then how each of them were a little bit different.
Yeah. Okay. So we visited several burial grounds, but 4 of them were monumental cemeteries, and we'll talk about, I guess, what a monumental cemetery is here too, because that was kind of for me as well.
A term, yeah.
Yeah, something I'm learning all about. So the 4 we went to were in Milan, Genoa, Bologna, and Florence. And the one in Milan was the first one we went to. That's where we landed. And it is phenomenal. It's huge. There are over 6,000 sculptures in there. I mean, and they're amazing. Like the one behind you is just one of the many. I was a little overwhelmed trying to find photos to send you. I finally just had to pick a few and go, okay, I can't even, because I fell down a rabbit hole. And next thing I knew, a couple hours had gone by, and I was just looking at photos going, and taking notes, and I wasn't even organizing them. So we went there. We had breakfast. Early breakfast. Right after breakfast, our driver dropped us off at the gates of the cemetery. Oh, which is right behind you. That's behind you there, Jennie.
Yeah, I was trying to pull it up so that folks could see it. So if you're on YouTube with us, and if you're not, listeners, go back later. We'll put all these pictures online too.
You're smooth. Yeah, that's how it looks after you've walked inside. That's the Lombardy style, is kind of that stripy look, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. But and I just wanted to give an overview to show you that, you almost don't know where to begin. We had a map. I printed a map. I had certain it was like when you go to see the Louvre, you have to know you have to just go, I want to see this picture and that picture. It was kind of, I knew there were certain things I wanted to see and everything else would be gravy. So we got there as soon as we could after breakfast. We ran around like crazy. I mean, I was trotting and taking photos and just looking for certain things. And then at 1 o'clock, it's a siesta culture, and so
I've heard,
the crowds left, but they didn't close the cemetery for lunch. So we stayed and we ate lunch right there in the cemetery. Lisa had made this amazing crackers that I need to make out of polenta, and she bought all these cheeses. We had fresh figs. I mean, it was just really great. So we were just chowing down, eating all this fresh stuff, and then we just kept going. And there were some amazing things there. I'll talk about later about the Jewish section here because it's kind of different, but we'll get to that later. So by 4, it was a little bit of a hot day, and you can tell from the photos of me there, like my face is all red and blotchy, and all my hair is just like down. Someone very tactfully, I posted a photo. They're like, "It looks kind of hot there." And I'm like, "Yeah, because I'm just melting down."
Well, and as much exercise as you were getting while you're doing all this.
I was trotting all over in the heat, so I decided to sit down and just have a drink of water. And this older man walks over to me. At first, I didn't know who he was, and then he had an official thing around his neck that said he was a guide he worked there. He was a cemetery
nice.
worker. And so he came up, and I was all thrilled because I love languages. I'm not fluent in Italian, but I can understand a bit and I can make some conversation. So he came up and he didn't speak English, and he came up and he asked me in Italian, have you seen Toscanini's grave? And I'm like, no. And so he said, you must. And I said, well, I don't have much time. And I told him I had 45 minutes. And he said, okay, because that's all the time we had left before we had to leave, I think. And he trotted me even faster. I was ready to take a break. And then he just took off. He's like 70s or more, I mean, he was in great shape. The heat didn't faze him. He was running all around, and he was opening up mausoleums and like having me go inside and walked out places I would not have gone. Like, I just usually think those things are off limits, but just like, no, look, I'm like, okay. How Italians are.
They're very passionate when they talk.
They were. So it's kind of contagious. I get that way when I'm there. And yeah, so that was really kind of an adventure. I really enjoyed that, but I still did not see all 6,000. I still know if I went back tomorrow, I mean, I would love to do more. We only had 1 or 2 days in each cemetery, which I would love to have had more. So then that was very neat. We went then to Genoa, which is a port town, and Staiano it is the name of the Monumental Cemetery there, and it is one of my absolute favorites. I'm not alone in that. Ernest Hemingway loved it. He called it one of the wonders of the world. Mark Twain said something, to paraphrase, like in one of his travelogues, he said, long after we have forgotten the cathedrals and the museums, these statues that we've seen in Staiano Cemetery are going to stay in our memory. I mean, that's not an exact quote, but that's what he was saying. Essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. There, I think that's where one of the many times I was all sweaty. But I love this. I love this.
A lovely skull.
Yeah, I love that skull. So there were a lot of skulls, and they aren't always memento mori there. Sometimes they will have what they call a genius, which is usually an adolescent boy. So it's not a cherub, it's more of an adolescent boy draped in a tunic, kind of a neoclassical tunic. And next to him, he will have maybe a skull, and that might be telling you that the deceased was in the medical profession, like an anatomist or one of them I looked up or something. So it's interesting that the different ways skulls can be used. And I think in this case, it might have been that an anatomist. It might have been with a neoclassical one, but it is interesting, to see that. I'm a sucker for skulls. I mean, I have them all over my house. I have drinking my iced tea out of a skull right now.
This one's great. I mean, he's got a good grin and everything. So
I know, they really are amazing. Well, one of the things about Staiano is it has a lot of hyper real statues. This is where there is a widow standing at a deathbed or a door, and you can see the tears have been sculpted on her face. She's life-size. And when I go there, I've been there twice, and every time I go there, I'm usually running around, and there's this one sculpture that's gotten me both times. I come around the corner and I go, mi scusi. and it's just he's
It's a sculpture.
it's a monk. He's like a monk, and I just think he's inside. If that statue's laughing like, ah, got her again. But it's yeah, and that happens all around. Like the people we were with were going like, oh man, I thought that was a real person. Some of the people on the tour were saying that. I'm like, I know, it's startling. Yeah, it was really amazing. And then the other two we went to, one was Bologna, which was very different because it wasn't built just to be a cemetery. It was on the grounds of an old Carthusian monastery, which Carthusians are interesting because they had monks, male monks. So they also had female nuns living there. So I'm sure there must have been all sorts of escapades. Like there must have been some drama there from time to time, but I don't know. I didn't get into that too much. But yeah, it was a very different feel to it. Now, I should have sent you some photos too of where like you wander inside these buildings that have neoclassical figures on either side of a doorway. And then you look through and you just see other doorways to other doorways with all these. It's very labyrinthian. It's very different. That one was unique, I would say. And it turns out it was built on top of an ancient Etruscan burial ground, but they didn't know that until maybe 60 or 70 years after they built it. They were digging up and they were like, oh, hey, what's this? And they found some.
There's already bodies here.
Oh, what do you know? And Etruscan tombs are very interesting. And we'll be seeing some of them next year on next year's tour, by the way. So I'm so excited. But okay. And then the other one we went to was Florence, which used to be the capital of basically during our Civil War. So like 1860 to 1865-ish, I think, is when it was the capital of Italy. So it's very opulent and it really looks over, it's up on a hill and you have this tremendous view. It's some of the best views you can have in Florence. So there you go.
To be able to take some photos of Florence from that kind of view would be really cool.
We took a bunch.
I was gonna say, because I've been to Florence, but I didn't go to any of the cemeteries. So I've just been down like in the city proper. So yeah, that would be really cool to be able to stand above it and see the whole thing laid out.
I think even some people who don't enjoy cemeteries much or think about them just kind of come up to that area and just walk up to the gate and take photos. I saw people seem to be doing that.
Well, when you can get that space and then you can get all those, because Florence has some fairly tall, they've got a bunch of cathedrals and art museums and they're tall. So
yeah.
To be able to get them from a higher angle is pretty cool.
Get those overviews.
I mean, you definitely were talking to us about the monumental cemeteries, and we've talked about the real garden cemeteries quite a bit on this podcast as well. So, explain the difference.
Oh, you froze for a second. But yeah, the difference. Okay, this was really interesting to me. And I know you all have. I really like Joy Giguère's interviews that you've done with her and her book, which I have, and I've been going through and loving. But yeah, so the difference between a monumental and a garden cemetery, the interesting thing is they came about for the same reasons at the same time period. The overcrowding, the hygiene, this, that, no more church burials, yada, yada, yada. I know you've covered that before. But here's what separates them. One thing you will say, pretty much three different things help distinguish them. First off, in a monumental cemetery, an Italian one anyway, maybe not in some other ones around the world, but definitely in an Italian one, you're going to have a famedio, which is just like the Hall of Fame. So it's going to be a section when you walk in that's all the people, the locals. It's a way to express their civic pride. It's all the hot shots from
the mayors and
our favorite architect. This is our favorite engineer. They had a big thing in the 1800s. They were very proud of their engineers, and so they would have sections. But the people that they were most, really wanted because it was expected. These cemeteries were on the grand tour. So young men, as they were taking their grand tour through Europe, they were going to come, and most of them were only open a couple years before they had guidebooks to them. So they were expecting people to come, and they were like, hey, come on here. So they want to put their best foot forward by having a famedio and having a little Hall of Fame area. The next thing that makes them different is that there's not really an emphasis on nature so much as there is on, not the garden emphasis. It's more like little cities. And so they're more like just paved streets, lots of concrete, lots of stone. because the emphasis is not on nature, and we could talk about that actually next. But the third thing that really makes them stand apart is that there are a lot of above ground burials.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that kind of gets into the whole thing about why they would have these above ground burials. It has to do with the Catholics Church. Their idea of paganism is associated with trees. So the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks, they often planted cypress in their burial grounds.
Yeah.
And so there was an association with pagan beliefs. Like I was actually in a little village, a little Greek village, and a woman we were talking to was telling us, instead of saying my husband died, she said, "Oh, I sent him to the cypress long ago." And I was like, wow, that's so poetic. And then
I
I was
like
talking
that.
to her. I know, I was like, wow. And so I double checked with our guide, like, she means that. And she goes, yeah, yeah. And he goes, like, when he's told me that, like, when he and his brother would fight when they were little kids, they'd be like, quit pulling my hair or I'll send you to the cypress. It was like, even today they say that. So I was like, okay. So, and even at one point in the 1800s, I came across a thing where in Rome, there was a cemetery where they had planted a grove of trees. And the papal legislation came down and said, no, we're not going to allow that, dig the trees up. But it was a Protestant cemetery. And so they said, hey, we're Protestant, knock it off, let us have our trees. But there's just different associations. So Protestants have they don't mind being returned to the earth. That's not a problem. I mean, it's nothing. In Italy, there's, in addition to perhaps being, the church frowning on it at one point, being buried in the ground, there was also a little bit of a stigma. It wasn't considered as high class. If you were upper class, you could afford to be buried, in what they call a loculi, which is Latin for little place. It's so these niche where your casket would be put. But if you were in the potter's field, then you were buried in the ground. So that was a little like a low class move. So it just how these things become certain connotations with them. So I thought that was so interesting. And so I started thinking, I noticed that other Catholic countries I've been to, predominantly like Argentina
I
or
was just thinking that same
Portugal,
thing as you were saying all of that, because they all have
Recoleta.
those like above ground burials and they're all like stone and mason. There's not, the nature is not involved. It's all like
Mhm.
one next to the next to the next with the stone pathways in between them.
Exactly. So that's that same thing. And I'm pretty sure it all stems back to those same thoughts and feelings and attitudes about what it means to
That's so
be, whether
interesting.
being buried to the ground seems neat to you, to me, being growing up Presbyterian and everything, to me, I thought, oh, return to the earth, this, that, the other. But yeah, it's a different thing.
It's interesting how, I mean, because we have a lot of Catholic churches and stuff in America,
Hmm.
but we don't necessarily have that. And I don't think we've ever really had that as part of our tradition for Catholics in
No.
America. Like there's Catholic cemeteries,
Hmm.
but those are generally in-ground burials.
That's what I've seen.
Other than like
New Orleans.
Orleans,
Hmm.
and sometimes people will have a mausoleum, but interesting
Hmm.
how that maybe that changed too because our landscape is different. So as they were
Well, and
immigrating over,
Yeah, I don't
also
know.
the cemeteries in Italy that we're talking about were 400, if not more, years older,
well,
right?
these monumental ones are about the same age as our garden
They are. They
cemeteries.
are.
Oh,
They
okay.
came about in the 1800s, pretty much,
That's
right about the same
interesting.
time. Yeah, there was that
That's why I
saying
think
that
that's
that eat.
interesting.
Mhm. Yeah,
Huh.
that's why kind of fascinating. And like the ones in Argentina, like Recoleta and all that,
Mm-hmm.
they're very much like that. I was in one cemetery in Marseille, and you think of I think of Père Lachaise and being a
Mm-hmm.
garden cemetery, but this was the one in Marseille was very much more like a monumental cemetery.
Hmm.
It was a lot of it was a mixture. It wasn't. I don't know. I was
Well,
kind of
now
like
that's
I
got
was
me
like now I
wondering
got to go back.
what Spain's cemeteries like. Does Spain have a bunch of monumental cemeteries then? Because they were mostly Catholic for so
Barcelona,
long.
yeah, it's at least the ones I've been to seem to have that same
Huh.
style, the above ground. So I don't know, this is
Never
one of those
even thought
things
about that.
I never, and I love that I'm this one thing I love about cemeteries is I never am like, oh, I've learned it all. There's this, I can go back to the same ones too with a different eye now because I went to one of my favorite cemeteries is in Puerto Rico, and it's right by, the ocean, and then
Right.
it's got this hill, and it's got a very long name, which I can't remember. It's like,
That's okay.
Santa Maria de Pazzi, but it's gorgeous, and all these marble there. I don't know where they got their marble from, but it's out there in the salt spray, which and marble not being
Right.
particularly durable. And I showed it to people at a monument builders conference that I spoke to, and they were all like, "Wow, this rock's phenomenal!" And I'm like, "I know, look how good, how pretty these are." But that one seemed more like a lot of above ground burials. That was a
Huh.
long-winded way of saying that. So I don't know.
I
It's
love that.
always more to learn.
I
Always more to
now
learn.
I'm more curious about learning more about that particular
Hmm.
belief through the Catholic
Yeah.
Church, just because, like I said, we don't, even with all the Catholic churches here, we don't have
Sorry.
that as our burial thing as much. But yeah. So you had mentioned that the surprising thing to you was
Oh
the
yeah.
influence of graveyard
Oh yeah.
poetry upon burial places. And I think, and I should have brought it over here because I have that book of poetry
You have
that
it?
was inspired by a lot of what you're finding, I'm sure, on a lot of these tombs
Yeah,
and
have
markers.
you? I know. I mean, I've listened to a lot of your shows, but I don't remember that you guys have you talked about Edward Young before?
I think so. I'm going to let you two
Okay.
chat. I'll be right back
Okay.
while you're chatting
All
because I
right.
have to grab this book.
Okay.
So I guess you
Well,
can lead into who was Mr. Young.
yeah, all right. Well, okay. So he's an English poet, and I know we're talking about Italian cemeteries, but he influenced Europe and the whole world, actually. His book of poetry, he had a book of poems called Night Thoughts. It's about 400 pages long. We usually think of poems nowadays. We think of them as 1 or 2 pages, or,
Right.
I don't think of them as being such epic as they were in the day. So this is in the 1700s, but it had quite an effect on the whole world. So it was like one of the most famous if not the most famous poem in the world for at least 100 years.
Of course, you would have it.
Is in your
Ooh.
Night Thoughts is part of this book.
Oh, okay.
So
It must be an excerpt because the
yeah,
whole Night Thoughts.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
how
not the
Graveyard
whole
awesome.
School.
thing, but
Okay.
Oh, that
this
looks
is
like a good book.
this is the
Yeah.
Graveyard School. So it's an anthology of
Okay, I'm
cemetery
taking a
poetry.
screen grab so I can
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
that.
When you brought him up, because I was like, I know I've read some of that in
Yeah.
this book. But yeah,
Okay.
these particular poets go back to the 16, 17, and 1800s.
Uh-huh.
And it's the way they put it all together. But yes, he's in here. That's why I had to go
Wow.
and find it. I was like,
Oh,
wait, I
you're
know
like,
that
hey,
one.
he sounds familiar. Yes. Well, all right. So in Italy, like around All Saints and All Souls Day, so, in October, November, uh, um, that was when there would be a lot of graveyard poems printed in the local papers. Like people would
Oh,
be writing
how
them.
cool.
And and even a lot of the sculptors, they would write poetry too. Like there was this one Bistolfi who seemed like a really interesting guy. And he was known for being like the poet of death, he called himself. And he would actually write epitaphs as well. So some of these sculptors would actually write epitaphs, they'd write their graveyard poems, and it was a thing. And the local art scene, when there was a new monument unveiled at the cemetery, they would cover it as if it were a gallery, like something
Wow.
showing it again. It was that big of a deal, especially at these monumental cemeteries. But getting back to Edward Young, yeah, he was okay. His Night Thoughts ended up being such a big deal. It caught on. It ended up being translated into every European language. It was widely read. Goethe, he used it, the philosopher, he used it as his primer for learning English.
Hmm.
In German, it's called Nachtgedanken, and which I think sounds fun. And it was they made a pun on it because a young man is called a Jüngling in German, and so
Mm-hmm.
aficionados of Edward Young, they called him Jünglings as kind of and so Goethe was a Jüngling. He was really into that. And so one of his poems actually had a big influence as the garden cemetery movement or rural cemetery, came about because Young's stepdaughter, essentially, she had consumption, and they went to France, hoping that it was going to help her. The climate would be better for her. And sad to say, she died. Now, because she was Protestant and not Catholic, no, they couldn't find a place to bury her. No churchyards would allow her to be buried. So he wrote, and so what they ended up doing was sneaking out into the grounds of their hotel at like 11 at night and burying her. And he writes a poem about it. It's called it's in Night Thoughts. It's called Narcissa's Burial, or Night 3, I think. And it had a real impact on people. People read that, and as a result, they started Catholics would bury their Protestant friends in their gardens. It kind of became as a like to show that they weren't bigoted, like, hey, and it kind of became a thing. And that sort of dovetailed into all of this. So I was reading about that. It was really interesting how that, and then I thought it was so interesting that I thought it was interesting that so many of these sculptors were dabbling in poetry too, because these days we tend to think, you pick your thing, you're a painter, you're a writer, you're a sculptor. We don't expect you to do all these things. So I thought that was really interesting. There were several sculptors that I was learning about, and just the influence of Edward Young's poetry I thought was pretty fascinating.
Cool. Well, and you think about it though, again, Italy, especially then, was definitely the art capital of the world for a long time. And that included not just sculpting and painting, but that also included writing and poetry. And so I can see where some of these sculptors were also probably dabbling in the poetry side of things and writing, because it was highly encouraged there in a lot of ways.
It is really fascinating. I thought that was just one of the fun things. There's so many things that I learned.
Oh, that's sad that they had to bury her.
Oh, I know.
The hotel grounds.
And I forget the way he puts it. He says something like the same courtesy, like they would have buried their dog somewhere, but they would not afford her the same courtesy that they would a dog. Or so, I forget how, he said it in a much more poetic way. But
well, that's kind of what happened with Mary and Percy Shelley's oldest son when he died, because they were in Italy at the time he died, but they weren't Catholic.
Oh.
And he did get buried in a cemetery, but they weren't allowed to mark his grave because they weren't Catholic.
Jeez.
So, yeah. And that would have been a little later than all of this, but not much.
Not much, yeah.
But yeah, so when he died, he is buried in one of the cemeteries. I think there's a marker for him now, because they kind of knew where he was, but originally they weren't allowed to mark his grave because neither one of them were Catholic. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Goodness.
So you had mentioned that you wanted to talk about the Jewish sections, and I'm assuming that we're going back to Milan for this, for their designated areas. And we did a while ago. I mean, it was far back a while ago. We talked about one of the Jewish ghettos in Italy specifically, and their specific cemetery. And I'm trying, I can't off the top of my head remember which one it was.
Venice, maybe?
I think it was, because it was Venice, now that you say it, because my curiosity was, how were they burying the dead in Venice, because the way the land is formed in Venice.
I've been to the cemetery island. It's pretty cool.
Yes, and we did talk about that, but we were specifically talking about the Jewish ghetto and the Jewish traditions that went along with their burials there. So why don't you talk about Milan's traditions and their segregated areas or designated areas?
And learning about Jewish heritage and all is really a big gap in my own knowledge. So I'm really enjoying learning more about different religions. And one of the people who was on the tour with me was Susan Lockwood, who's on the board for the Association for Gravestone Studies. And she has actually worked around the world in restoring different Jewish cemeteries, historic cemeteries, and she knew a lot. So like I learned some basics from her, like that there are Sephardic and there are Ashkenazi Jews, which I'd heard of, but I didn't know that the Sephardic have the ledger stones, the flat slabs, and the Ashkenazi have the upright headstones. And the Sephardic will occasionally have some imagery on their stones, maybe an angel, not usually the deceased, but just maybe a little something, something.
Right.
But the Ashkenazi really feel that any imagery is idol worship, and so they're very against that. Now, I'm not sure. I need to look back at my photos now. I think there were Sephardic ones in Milan, but there is a section in Milan. It was in the Milan Cemetery. It was hard to find. I found it, and it is, and thanks to Susan Lockwood for this, but it was really, I wanted to go there because I had read in advance that there was something a little different there. In 1861, Jewish people were given full Italian citizenship.
Yay.
I know. And so one way of claiming and proclaiming that they were Italians and they were just as Italian as anyone else was to get a nice burial plot in Milan Cemetery. I mean, it was a real social boon to have a plot there anyway, no matter who you were. So they're like, hey, we're just as Italian as you. Now I've got a plot there. And so rather than just stick to the Jewish traditions of plain flat slab with nothing on it, they got kind of fancy, and they would have images of the deceased sometimes, and they would have angels. They would have pretty much any other Victorian era symbol or neoclassical symbol you would think, not Christ on a cross, no crosses, but you would see, obviously, but you would see everything else there. And so it was pretty fascinating. Now, it was I just thought it was interesting how they bent the rules a bit I'm like, yeah, go for it. They wanted to be Italian, mixing your religion, mixing the culture. This was a way to proclaim that they were Italian. And some rabbis did speak out against it and said it was idolatry. But then others, when I was reading, I found some information where they said, no, it's not, because when we go, we pray, we said prayers to God. We're not praying to the deceased.
Right.
And so that was the way they got around it. But there was a little kerfuffle. There was a little bit of this or that. But by 1920s, it kind of died out. They went back to the traditions. They don't so much do it anymore, but it's just neat to see that. We did see the Jewish section in different places, but this is the only place where I saw Jewish graves where they had what I called fancy monuments, just like the other religions there. So I thought that was pretty neat.
How cool. That's so interesting. But yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad you got to see that, though. Well, and considering, because I think you said Milan had over 6,000 monuments and stuff in that one cemetery. I mean, that's a lot to try and take. I mean, you would have to spend months there to see all 6,000 monuments.
Oh yeah, I daydream about like getting to just stay there for a month and just go through it little by little,
every day.
Too, because sometimes there's a monument and you see it at 10 a.m. and it's not the best light. And you know that if you came back, it would have been better light at 4:30. I mean, I was still running around and taking, so I would have a whole strategy.
I love it. Yeah, that's interesting. So moving on from the Jewish monuments, let's move on to the widows becoming the major focus of the sculptural scenes on gravesites. And I think we touched on this a little bit with Joy when she was on, but I know it's a bigger thing actually in European cemeteries than it is here.
Oh, really? I listened to her interviews, but maybe I missed that. So I have to re-listen to things sometimes too.
Or we may have talked about that not recording. Sometimes, we have our pre and post show recordings and stuff comes up that didn't make it into the episode. So could have been something.
There's that. Well, all right. So as we all know, women used to die in childbirth pretty regular. I mean, it was pretty common. But then in the 1800s, there were advances in medical care. So before the 1800s, it wasn't uncommon for a man to outlive his wife and maybe have 2 or 3 wives. And, we all know when we're doing our historic research, sometimes it's frustrating when there's a Mrs. John Smith and then like you're reading it again later, there's another Mrs. John Smith. You realize they're 2 different ladies. You finally figure that out. But anyway, it's another pet peeve. But so back before around the 1820s or so, it's never like, how it is with history. There's never an exact date where everything just chop, everything changes. But around then, the focus was more at a gravesite was more on the deceased. So it might be Mr. John Smith, and you would see a bust of him, and then you would see maybe a neoclassical figure that's not really meant to be anybody. It's just what they call a pleuruse, which is a mourning female figure, or
Right.
maybe it's a genius to showing some attributes, but they would show a mourning female near him. And it's not meant to be his wife or anybody we really know. It's just grief herself or mourning herself. That's it. But I was talking about those hyper real sculptures that I saw,
Yeah.
like in Stiano and the other, and all around actually, that hyper realism kind of became a thing. And as women began to live longer, thanks to better health care, you would then begin to see a grieving woman. It would look just like a neoclassical tomb where they have the doorway, the threshold to life and death. A lot of times they have like a neoclassical figure standing there. Suddenly
Right.
you see an actual woman standing at the door, and it is meant, you can tell it's meant to be an actual person. Right down to, I was reading how these hyper realistic ones, they would make sure to emulate her exact lace, the type of lace that she had made for her dowry, her veil, everything was her actual clothing. They weren't, it was a replica of her. And what's interesting then is, so they began to focus on the widows, and they become, you start walking around and looking, and you start to see tombs that really are very deathbed scenes where the widow is a big feature, or like I said, those neoclassical ones where they've substituted real people instead of the kind of generalized
Right.
people. And what happened is women would then were kind of rising in power. Like they were taking over the family business in Italy. And so this was a lot of the reason that they were such a focus at the tomb. So it was just interesting. They were kind of the first career women. That's what I was thinking in Italy, as like these women who were taking over the family business and being
Because
shown.
they started to outlive their husbands.
They did. And so rather than passing it on to someone else, they would take over the family business, they would take over the tomb, and they became the focus of the tomb. And you kind of
That's
see
so
that
cool.
societal change. So I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. The first time I went to Stiano, I was just like, what's with all the widows? And then I did a little more digging. I was like, oh, I see. They were becoming kind of the career women.
You know what's great about that though, and because we've mentioned it a bazillion times. We like to share the women's story. Not that we don't share the men's stories, but we like the women's stories because so many of them got lost or forgotten and set aside. But the fact that they have as many widows' graves that are marked by actual replicas of those women,
Hmm.
those women are not getting forgotten, and those are the ones whose stories got passed down through their families because they were like, my great great grandmother did this, this, and this, and without her, our family wouldn't be here. So I think that's
Hmm.
really cool that there's, especially at that time, because that's right about when photography was becoming popular also. But I mean, this is in stone, these women.
Yeah, these women in
They've been carved
stone.
into stone.
Of course, there's this one woman who I want to write an article about her because she's different. She wasn't married, from what I can tell. She sold these they're like pretzels. They're sort of like circular pretzels.
Okay.
And I forget what they're called, canestrelli. I tried to find them. Anyway, she was in hazelnuts that were on a string. And her name is like Federico Campondonico, I think. Anyway, she was just a humble nut and bread sales person. And she saved all her, squirreled away all her acorns, and she commissioned a life-size portrait of her in all her finery, kind of showing her wearing her pretzels and
Oh,
hazelnuts.
that's so
And
cool.
it's really incredible. And it has a wonderful epitaph on it. And I mean, just the fact that she did that, and it was this Oneto, I think is the name of the sculptor, and he did a marvelous job, and it really kind of launched his career. I'm thinking, because I looked at the list of his works, and hers was the first one he did. Yeah, hers
Oh,
was the
how
first one he did.
cool.
And if you could get a good, a lot of guys could in Italy at least could base their whole careers around, if they did a good funeral monument, then
Right.
wow, sculpture, they could base their whole careers. And it launched his career. There his tons of his stuff around. It's yeah. So one of these days I'll write an article about her because she was really, really fascinating. She's
That's so cool.
there too.
I just want to, I'm not a sculptor by any means. I mean, I've played with Play-Doh. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's my thing too.
to know that, and I've seen some statues even here where they can get, like you said, the lace details and the tears and those tiny little, like to be able to do that in stone and to move the stone so that it looks like it's alive almost.
Oh yeah.
Just amazing to me.
It's incredible. It really is.
I Sculpture, there's just something about sculptural works, at least to me, that I like art, all art. I love performance art. I love just artistic expression in general, but something about sculpture can be very, very moving. I find
Yeah. Just
the,
the way, I mean, those really talented sculptors, they turn that stone into something more than just the stone that it was.
and I like the ones that are out. There's something about them, the ones that are out there, like a bronze. It's all patinaed, and it's intersection between. They don't have it under a shield. It's out there
Right.
in the elements, and the intersection to me between nature and man's creation comes together in this beautiful way in a cemetery that I find especially moving. It reminds us of our own transience and our own connection to nature. And I like to see the lichen on the things. I like to see the nature combining with it. It really, to me, really much better than to see it in a gallery. I like to see it outside with nature interacting with it.
It definitely demonstrates the passage of time because, like you said, from the bronze to the patina and to the lichen. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. That's
Oh,
Yeah.
I even here, even without statues or anything, I like seeing some of the lichen. And I know this is a very strong opinion depending on who's talking or who's thinking of it, but especially older tombstones, I like when they have a little bit of age to them and they're not perfectly clean and they're not the way they would have looked the day they were carved. And yes, I have cleaned some headstones and I've helped doing that. And I do think there's times when it's necessary if you want to be able to read them. But like you said, there's something very beautiful about that passage of time and showing.
Yeah, some stains, some weathering. I'm fine with that. It's nice to clean it enough to be able to read to me, there's a balance to be had there because I do like that. I did just do an article for this fella, David Dewberry. He sent me some before and after of his cleaning, and I asked people on my newsletter for questions to ask him because I don't know anything about cleaning. I've never, most I do is I carry a whisk broom with me and bird poop and just a little bit, out of the way if I'm going to take a photo, but I don't go bonkers. But one of the before and afters that he did, I love like before after things of anything, but he had one that was marble and it was kind of stained because it had been in the dirt, and he said to him that he thought was beautiful, and I was glad he said that because I liked the stain. I didn't want everything to look like it just came out of the factory floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally, and like I said, I know I've seen and I've shared photos on our own social media of stones that are dirtier or even whole cemeteries that are a little more overgrown or a little whatever. And there are times where people will comment and say, oh, it's a shame that it's like that, or somebody needs to clean that. And I'm kind of like, no. And I don't want to get into social media arguments. I really try not
to
do that.
I hear you there.
I mean, I've done it 1 or 2 times. But
yes, that's what's
but I try and intimate, how important it is that sometimes this is the way it should be for certain cemeteries or certain areas.
I like to bring up the cemetery I was in Cornwall. It was Falmouth, Cornwall, and it was huge. It was great big tall headstones like they have in England, and there was all these winding paths throughout. Some of them were mowed, and people were walking their dogs and jogging, but there was certain areas that were so overgrown, and they had a big sign that explained that some places they just never mowed. Some places were on timed mowing so that they could allow certain things to bloom and support different pollinators. And that they support that cemetery, they said, as a wildlife corridor. It supports 50 species of solitary bee and 11, I think, species of endangered butterfly. And it went on about all these things that it did. So it was kind of saying, get over it. Some of us is going to look messy to you, but we're supporting life. We're supporting nature. But and there's still plenty of places to walk. And there were because it was big and look at. So it was great.
Well, and I think if you don't have somebody that can properly care for a certain section in the cemetery anymore, or if the stones are just that far gone or whatever, that's a better use of the cemetery anyway at that point.
Yeah.
I like it. Oh, that's so cool.
That is
Yeah.
very, very cool. So you've mentioned writing your blog and writing your newsletter.
Yeah.
So hear that you now have a monthly column in American Cemetery and Cremation magazine, which is so
Oh,
exciting.
it is so exciting. I
I know, I'm
love
so
it.
looking forward to reading it every month.
Yeah, next, oh, see, it was so fun. It's fun too because it gives me the editor is really nice, Tom, and he, it gives me a chance to revisit some topics like, Woodmen of the World. So I
Right.
revisited that and I ended up reading a book of Joseph Cullen Root's speeches, which gave me a deeper appreciation for how it's interesting. His whole deal was he wanted uh, a, um, a modest monument for the common man. And I laugh because quite often those tree stone monuments, when I go into a historic cemetery, they're the most eye-catching,
Yes.
fanciest looking
They're
thing
not
out there. But he
modest.
but he wrote that, the modest man who's led a humble life, he needs a little stone. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's just so funny. But yeah, but I did, writing these articles gives me a chance to kind of revisit them. And I like how they fact check things too, because I had
Mhm.
misspelled a piazza like name in Italy, and they isn't shouldn't it be spelled like this? I'm like, oh great, thank you. So I enjoy that.
Yeah, I was super
It's really
excited when
wonderful.
I
There you
got
go.
last month's issue and I saw your article in there and I was like, oh, look, Tui wrote for him.
Oh yeah,
And
I
that's
love it.
before I realized you were going to have the monthly column. But I was like, oh, look, I
It's
do that.
nice. I know they use a lot of my photos too. I'm such a shutterbug. It's really nice to have an outlet
Oh,
for the
yeah,
photos. So I just fill Dropbox with like 60 photos each time and go, take your pick, Tom.
I love that. That's
And
what
I'm
we did
gonna
Very cool.
when the podcast was featured. They asked us to take pictures. We took a whole bunch and we just sent them all and they picked what they wanted and
they can have the fun. It gets to be too much, yeah. But
it
next
worked.
month, December, I'm doing an article about the Monteverde Angel, which is in Genoa in Stiano, same cemetery as the pretzel lady, who I guess I should
Yeah.
do one about eventually. But yeah. So it,
Oh,
it was
how
really
fun.
interesting. It was fun to revisit that, and I dug up some really, oh my gosh, such gossip. Oof. Anyway, I was like, am I writing a gossip column or am I writing a cemetery symbols column this time? But it was fun.
I don't know. Sometimes that's the fun thing about the research, the things that you come across when you're doing that historical research and the things to read.
Oh, you know what I have
Oh,
to do is I have a kitchen timer and I set it for 20 minutes at a time, kind of, and because after 20 minutes it goes off. And if I am looking up some obscure thing, socks that were knit by the ancient people of Etruscan, whoops, it has nothing to do. And
Oh,
that's the only way I can get anything done is every 20 minutes go ding, oh, where am I now? Oops, how far
that's
have I
a
wandered?
that's
really
a good
good idea
idea.
because you can wander really deep into some of those rabbit holes. And yeah, then you
Oh,
completely lose track of what you were originally researching to begin with.
oh,
But
especially
you don't want to lose
newspaper
track of the
archives.
rabbit hole.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
those newspaper archives too. I get emotionally invested in a different article, and all I have to read that's on page 17. It finishes over there, and then oh no.
I know I've clipped some every now and then. I'll clip one because I'll be looking at something else. I'm like, oh, this could be another episode. And then I'm like, I have to
Oh
save this
yeah,
for a future episode because I'll read that.
yeah.
I'm like, it has nothing to do with what I'm currently trying to write up. But
Oh
I
yeah.
love when
I'll
and
lose
just
it. Yeah.
reading, I have a collection of Time magazines from 1949, I think is the
Oh
date on all of them.
wow.
And I recently loaned two of them to a high school production. They're doing Thornton Wilder's Happy Journey. It's a
Oh
one
wow.
act show. And they asked if I had any newspapers from the 40s. I'm like, I don't have any physical copies of newspapers from the 40s, but I'm like, I do have some Time magazines if you want to use one of those.
Ah, oh
And
very
the theater
cool.
teacher was like, can I just like keep this and read this for a while? I was like, yes, as long as I get it back at some point, but go ahead and read the articles because they're fascinating to read.
And the
Oh
advertisements
my gosh,
too.
the
Oh
ads are the
yeah.
best.
I know one of my favorites is like this ad I always see for Grove's Chill Tonic, and it shows a baby. Have you seen it? A baby's head and then the body
Yep.
of a pig, and it says makes your kids as fat as pigs. Like that was, nowadays we're like, oh, childhood obesity, and then 150 years ago they're like, how to fatten up your little kids,
Yeah, when they were still trying to figure out how to get enough food on the table for everybody. So
Yeah.
Exactly. Mhm.
Oh, that's so funny.
yeah, that those the old ads, old articles, just the way people wrote, the style, the thing that sometimes the topics
Oh
in the
yeah.
newspapers, the how, especially the small towns where they reported on what everybody was doing and who visited who and who. I'm like, We
Oh
don't do
yeah.
that anymore.
No, I know. It's like, Mrs. Jane Doe of Oak Street, 23 Oak Street, will be leaving town for 3 weeks next. I'm like, what? We didn't do that
And it
now.
goes in the
Like,
paper. I'm like, well,
mhm.
now everybody could go rob her house because they all know she's going to be gone.
Exactly. But, it was different
It's
times.
pretty, I know people
You're
were a lot more
essentially
trustworthy then, I guess.
you're essentially
Um,
doxing them. But no, it didn't matter back then.
so tell us about this upcoming, you're going to do another tour next year.
Yeah. I,
And you get to meet one of our other guests in person, which I'm super excited about.
yes. Yes, two things. Okay, so Lisa has asked me back to
Yay!
do another 10-day tour. Yeah, we're gonna do it. We'll start on Halloween essentially because we want to be in Rome for All Saints and All Souls Day
Oh my
and to
God.
see what they do. I'm so
Oh,
curious because I don't never experienced that. It's gonna be fun. And we don't have everything picked out. We're gonna see some Etruscan tombs, I know as well, and which are really cool. I have seen some before and they're really amazing. But yeah, it's going to be a very fun
oh
tour.
no.
But
Oh,
it's hard to leave my house at Halloween because we actually we get this year we only had 800 trick-or-treaters.
Whoa.
We get between 800 to 1,000, generally from about 5 p.m. until 9 p.m. We're just out on our front porch with our candy tube. And we have so many kids come. And so if we are out of town, we really have to make sure our house sitter, we buy tons of candy for them, but
Is ready to do Halloween. Yeah.
we make sure that friends come over to help them because it's a mob scene. Our little neighborhood is kind of far enough out that it became a tradition for all the farm kids to come in.
Oh, I love
And so
that.
this has been happening since the 70s or 80s. And my husband was
oh,
like, and our house is the last one at the top of the hill, and it looks a little like a castle. It's a little spooky. So yeah, so it was for me to leave, but this I couldn't. I had to say yes. She goes, "Well, are you going to do Halloween or not?" I'm
Yeah.
like, you know what? Yes. I'll miss a Halloween. So we're gonna
yeah.
do that.
I
It's
would
gonna be
miss a
great.
Halloween for that.
I mean, I'll be
Mm-hmm.
having a Halloween, but it'll be kind of different. It'll be wow, I'm sure I'll learn a lot. I'm really looking forward to that. And then I am gonna be traveling again in starting next month, actually. And one of the stops I'm going to visit. I get to see Lauren Rhodes. I get to meet her in person. I am so excited.
It is so cool.
And
So very
Tom
cool.
said from American Cemetery, he said I could write an article about it too. So I'm like, can I write an article about meeting her and blah blah blah? And yeah, because he he knows about her books and everything. So
Yeah, and she's been, I mean, her October was busy too. She was giving talks and doing all kinds of stuff this whole last month.
I
So,
know I need to go back and scroll. I haven't even been on Facebook barely. I just had to sort of just unplug and just go to the cemeteries, which was fun.
But how
I
nice
totally
you
approve.
on Facebook. You just got to enjoy the cemeteries and the food.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can't, the food in Italy is, I mean, one of the best things ever.
we were very spoiled. We were very spoiled.
Yeah. And
Oh,
you
my
have the
goodness.
private chef. So that's even more fun. That's when we were in Switzerland, we had a chef at the chalet where we were staying. And every morning she would go down to the little village that was down the mountain from where we were. And she would, pick up whatever ingredients she needed for the meals for that day. And then she would buy for dinner. It was lunch we usually packed out because we were going to be out doing whatever. And breakfast was usually like muesli and fruit and stuff. But
Yeah, yeah.
dinners,
Yeah, the dinner is the we also one place we went to in Bologna, our driver told us about was just a little farmhouse. I was like, what is the deal? We get out and there's only one little rickety sign that says it's a trattoria. At first we couldn't tell. You go in there and the chef comes out. He's this big guy. He has a tattoo of John Belushi on his arm for some reason. And there's no menu. He just talks with us for a couple minutes. It says, "Oh, do you like this? Do you like that?" And I know what I'm going to make you. And then he brings out different courses and that's it. There's one sitting and you eat that and it was so good. It was such a great
fun.
meal, really fun, very different. And I'm like, sure, make whatever. Oh my gosh, homemade pasta, this really amazing. I love panna cotta, oof, and the fresh wet cheeses that they have. They have different kinds.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, those are so good.
The
You
type
can't
that
bring
we
them
can't get
home.
here because it's not allowed.
No, I know. I'm like, how could I? If I were going to be a smuggler, it would not be drugs. I'd be sneaking home some wet cheese from Italy.
Oh, yeah, the food there. And then, I mean, gelato. I'm assuming you've
Uh-huh.
had some gelato at some point and
Yes.
real tiramisu, like all of the stuff. It's just
Yeah. Good stuff.
And the
Looking forward to
headstones
it.
are pretty cool too. I mean,
Oh yeah, and then there's all the cool history and so yeah, this was not a food tour. That was just a sideline. But yes, so I'm really looking forward to meeting Lauren though. I'm so excited. And
That will be so much fun. The two of you are going to be great together. And I,
oh,
oh
I look
gosh,
forward
yes.
then to reading the article in the magazine once
yeah,
you
that'll be
put that
fun.
together.
Hmm.
So, well, Tui, thank you so much
Thank
for joining
you.
us tonight and telling us all about this trip. We will have some of the pictures that she sent us on all of our social media pages, so you can definitely check those out. And of course, if you've been following along, as you've been watching on YouTube, we've posted several of them here too. So, and then of course, Tui, what is your website so that people can come and look and sign up for you really should sign up for her newsletter because
Yeah.
it's great to read.
Well, thank you. My website is just my name, Tuisnider. So no Y's in it, tuisnider.com. I'm kind of shifting my newsletter just to my Patreon. It is free, but it's just since I'm traveling, I'm trying to kind of consolidate everything and I'll be posting a whole bunch of pictures there as I travel. I really want to, when I travel, I really do my best to take people along with me as much as I can and share
I
photos.
love that too.
And I love hearing from people too. And, I know you have listeners all over the world. So if you've got any listeners in Australia or Malaysia or Singapore, those are some places I'm going to be visiting. And I really want to meet some
Oh,
cemetery
that would
folks
be
there.
cool. Well, yeah.
Yes, definitely. We'll have the website and we'll have everything linked in the show notes. So if you're in one of those countries and you want to reach out to Tui and say, hey, when are you going to be here? And you guys will it'll be so much fun. But yes, and definitely follow her on her social media pages too, because like you said, she takes you along. All the stuff that you were doing this past month,
Yeah.
just in Texas, I was excited to see when you were going to all the festivals and then those cemeteries.
Oh,
Thanks. It was fun to see and again experience the cultural differences that we don't always think about being in cemeteries unless you participate in that particular culture. Like if that's your culture, then yeah, it's not new to you. But to those of us that don't, it's kind of cool to be able to have that inside view like you were showing. So thank you for going to them, but also thank you for taking the time to put them on social media so we could see it and join along.
And for joining us too. So
Yes.
we really appreciate that.
I love your show.
Well, you're welcome back anytime,
Yeah.
of course.
Thank you.
We thank you for taking time to join us today for this ordinary, extraordinary chat. To learn more about today's discussion, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find additional links in our show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast. This really makes us more visible to others on YouTube who may also enjoy our podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery and on X at OrdExtraCem. So OrdExtraCem. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple's podcast, Spotify, or directly on our website. You can also leave those same comments on YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories. And if you're feeling extra generous and want to help support the podcast in a financial way, you can now buy Dianne and I a cup of coffee, either through YouTube or on our website. Simply click on the coffee cup icon and it will allow you to make a donation.
Until we meet again.